Welcome to this XpoNorth 2022 session on Poetry Now. I'm Peter Urpeth, XpoNorth's advisor in the writing and publishing sectors, and I'm delighted to welcome to the conference two of the finest and most influential poets around, Joelle Taylor and Michael Pedersen. I'm going to let them introduce themselves and their work, but what of this session? Well, the booming interest in poetry, so marked during the pandemic, shows no sign of decline. From the emergence in recent years of poetry on YouTube, of Instapoets, to increased traditional book sales, sell-out readings, slams and spoken word events, poetry is clearly more and more accessible, necessary and relevant to our daily lives than ever before. So where are we now with all of this? Where is poetry publishing now? Where is poetry performance now? What are the key considerations, the options and opportunities for writers to take their poetry and spoken word works to new audience? And what's driving that change? These are just some of the issues I'd like to get into, but also Michael and Joel are organisers of really groundbreaking poetry and music events, which have become so rooted, if not synonymous with their localities, with Michael's now Reekie in Edinburgh and Joel as the host of London's fantastic Outspoken. Both offer a compelling mix of spoken word, poetry and music in their programmes, and we'll look at how they built those platforms, how they built strong brands for these events, how that work and their work has become an international phenomena, and the role that has played in bringing new audiences to poetry. So first I'd like to hand over to our poets. They will introduce themselves and their work. And as we're also very keen to keep poetry right at the centre of what we do today, I've also asked both Michael and Joel to read one of their own poems and select one by another author that has been a standout for them in recent times. And we'll repeat that at the end of this session too. And I guess I'm coming to Michael first.
Cool. Yeah, well, I mean, your introduction was much more generous than it would have been with myself. So I'll just say I'm Michael Pedersen. I'm a poet. I've published a few poetry collections. I've got a poetic prose memoir coming out soon. And yeah, I'm one of the organisers of Reekie. So we've been putting on literary events for nearly 12 years in Scotland and the world over. There's a wee micro publisher attached to that. We produce poetry anthologies. We've got a little record label. We curate a lot of events with and for some of Scotland's and the world's biggest art festivals. But I'll read a poem, first of all. I thought since I was in Edinburgh, I would do one that was Edinburgh focused. And I wanted to start with a love poem. It's sort of a slightly unusual love poem in that it's a love poem to two buildings that I thought were two of the most gorgeous creatures on the Edinburgh skyline. But in fact, Scotland disagreed with that. They labelled them eyesores. They disagreed with it to such an extent that they've knocked both the buggers down. So there's now both of them are on the horizon. So this is a love poem for the ghosts of two of my favourite buildings. Edinburgh's fallen. Kilkenzie power stations, twin chimneys, once stood 150 metres above the Preston Pans ice cream van, a coal-fired colossus billowing clots of pewter cloud, profane in its massiveness. Portobello High School marred the skyline. No plutocrat, it earned every inch of its staunch shadow. Porty's first partisan. From undefeatable gladiators flaunting weaponry to clapped out greyhounds hiding a limp. When they blew up the power station, thousands revelled, climbed hills, took to the beaches and boarded boats with picnics. Countdowns swelled, misfired, looped back. The beans kept jumping until, boom, thirst fired us, rifled its gut like popping candy fed to the swans. Then the chimneys crumbled inwards, embraced like drunk friends falling, laughing. We surveyed from a verdant summit, toasted it as Hogmanay, snogged, watched again on YouTube with a soundscape in slow motion. Spectral voices mooing as the bricks unzipped, disappearing behind a powder. The last opal of smoke the dragon issued saw it choke on its own ash. The high school, met a more shameful demise, stripped down in stages over an aeon, robbed of its cape, finger bones broken, gouged by metal claws until lower than a double-decker bus, loose wires fraying in wind, ugly as unfair grief, all the dignity of a tiger in a cage at a cocktail party, a crab launched at a rock. What happened to Merry Christmas, tattooed on its brow by some brave bastard held out a window by their ankles? What happened to the bats guarding the greenhouse, the spider plants that kept growing though creosote black fed only cigarette ends, to the carrier bags caught on pigeon wire like geese wrung by the neck, to the slip in the middle of the stairwell, a spit and piss speckled portal down which objects and fluids like asteroids flew. Over 1,000 deaths extincted, all those names scraped into their pelts, manifestos, declarations. What happened to the cupboard the history teacher shagged a student in, which definitely happened. Junior assured me. His sister seen it. Junior, with a lisp, who OD'd. What happened to Junior besides his dying? To my first kiss, first punch, first balk at the ache of the bullied, yen for the far off, because we can't plan our hunger just where it takes us. Kilkenzie was handed a queen's sword to fall on. Portobello died a death of 1,000 cuts. I'm not saying I'd switch them. Who am I to condemn the heart of a heretic? It's enough to be here when they're not.
Yeah.
Cool.
Sick.
Now, are we going to go poem of our own, or am I rolling straight into one by someone else now?
One by someone else, I think.
Cool. Now, I'm going to read the first poem of Time as a Mother, which is Ocean Vuong's, a Vietnamese American poet's first collection. Now, he's not someone that's ubiquitous in the Scottish poetry scene, which I'll be talking about a bit, but I'm reading it because rumour has it that he will be coming to Scotland to perform for the first time in Scotland at that point in time. So I'm pretty excited about that, and I wanted to do his prologue poem to honour that international arrival. The Bull. He stood alone in the backyard, so dark the night purpled around him. I had no choice. I opened the door and stepped out, wind in the branches. He watched me with kerosene blue eyes. What do you want? I asked, forgetting I had no language. He kept breathing to stay alive. I was a boy, which meant I was a murderer of my childhood. And like all murderers, my God was stillness. My God, he was still there, like something prayed for by a man with no mouth. The green, blue lamp swirled in its socket. I didn't want him. I didn't want him to be beautiful, but needing beauty to be more than hurt, gentle enough to want. I reached for him. I reached, not the bull, but the depths, not an answer, but an entrance, the shape of an animal, like me.
Amazing.
Now, Joel.
Yes, that was brilliant, Michael.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've just started the new Ocean Vuong book, so I recognise that poem. But
Oh,
yours
wow.
was fantastic. Wow. Okay, so my name's Joelle Taylor, and I'm a poet, novelist, stripper. No, not really. I'm essentially a poet. I founded the National Youth Slams of this country in 2000, 22 years ago, and I led it for 18 years on the ethic that it's about connection, and it's about platforming pretty much silenced or hidden voices, and that's what I really think the sort of heart of slam is. It's not about who wins, or it never used to be about that, but about who's in the room and what we're speaking about, and like I said, trying to forge that connection. As a poet, I've written 3 books, and my last one, Conto and Other Poems, just won the TS Eliot Prize. And I just won the Saboteur Award for Best Spoken Word Artist, which is absolutely, it's like winning the double. Do you know what I mean? It's winning the double. Like football. I'm so fucking happy. Oh, sorry for swearing. And I'm also part of the team that curates Outspoken. And we're resident now at the South Bank Centre in the Purcell Room. It was founded by Anthony Naxaguru 10 years ago. And similar to Reekie, we've got a press called Outspoken Press. We do live tours of both the press and of the night. We run masterclasses, and we also have the Outspoken Prize for poetry. So that's who I am, and I'll just do a quick poem from Conto. Now, the basic idea of Conto is that a series of vitrines, which are museum display cabinets, start to appear around all the old spaces that have been closed down where queer people used to meet and to thrive. And inside each of these display cabinets is something from my past, and as well as queer history. So there's a museum of first kisses, there's the Admiral Duncan being blown up, and inside one of them, like a snow globe, is an entire dive bar called the Maryville. And inside the Maryville are 4 butches, and this is the youngest one of them. Her name is Angel, and she's a boy. And a boy in Polari is spelled B-O-I, and it means a young butch. And I don't know how much you know about the butch counterculture, but it tends to have risen from trauma. And the closer you are to that moment of trauma, the younger you are, the more you use your fist. We don't really talk about how women use violence. But anyway, this is Angel. When Angel looks in the mirror, it looks away first. Star fist, open jaw, how the shine becomes you, clean friend, taller than yesterday, spine and unraveling plots you, odd insistence. My king of the blue tattoo, eyebrow pinned Prince Butterfly, when you walked in the room, it became you. How you brought the silence in with you, how you brought the night to its knees, back there where the quiet ones go, and now the night won't stop texting. How many times have we walked home, you and I, only to find home walking softly behind us? I have seen you leap over language to push a man back inside himself, throw pint glasses like seeds, speak to every woman as though she were your mother. I have seen your fists sob. At the centre of every boy is a bare room, and inside a swinging light bulb, a wire thin girl dances, stays with you, even when you look away. Angels don't fall from heaven, they leave at closing time. Unscrew their fucks from the backs of black cabs, abandon their bodies beneath a girl, beneath a duvet, beneath the wet, dilated night, on fire. And for my sort of second poem, I wanted to choose someone that actually is part of what I think is the kind of American Revolution in poetry, which I'm sure we're going to talk about. What I mean by that is people who found their poetic on the stage through the slam scene, but have evolved to take over, really, the literary scene as well. So I'm thinking of authors like Dana Smith and Sam Sachs, and this is Fatima Ashgar. And she's written a beautiful poem called If They Should Come For Us. These are my people, and I find them on the street and shadow through any wild, oh wild, my people, a dance of strangers in my blood, the old woman's sari dissolving to wind, Bindi, a new moon on her forehead, I claim her my kin, and sew the star of her to my breast. The toddler, Dangling from stroller hair, a fountain of dandelion seed. At the bakery, I claim them too. The Sikh uncle at the airport who apologizes for the pat down. The Muslim man who abandons his car at the traffic lights. Abandons his car at the traffic lights, dropped to his knees at the call of the azan, and the Muslim man who sips good whiskey at the start of Maghrib, the lone Carla at the park, pairing her curta with Crocs. My people, I can't be lost. When I see you, my compass is brown and gold and blood. My compass, a Muslim teenager, snapback and high tops, gracing the subway platform. Mashallah, I claim them all. My country is made in my people's image. If they come for you, they come for me too. In the dead of winter, a flock of aunties step out on the sand. Their dupattas turn to ocean. A colony of uncles grind their palms, and 1,000 jasmines bell the air. My people, I follow you like constellations. We hear the glass smashing the street, and the nights opening their dark. Our names, this country's wood for the fire. My people, the long years we've survived, the long years yet to come. I see you map my sky, the light, your lantern, long ahead, and I follow. I follow.
Wow, thanks, Joel. Thanks so much, Michael, as well. Amazing stuff. Can I ask, so the general premise of this session is poetry now, incredibly broad thing, and perhaps the answer to the question I'm going to pose to you, which is, what's your take on that, might actually also lie in a definition of the terms. I know what the now bit means, but the poetry bit. So I just want to ask you both, what's your take on this whole kind of picture I've painted of poetry now? Where, in your estimation, is it? Are we? Where's it going?
I mean, I think we're in an interesting space, poetically speaking, and it kind of references a little bit what I was saying about the American poets, like who are coming from the slam scene. I feel like there's been a conversation really between what we think of as the stage and what we think of as publishing, and we're learning the most interesting parts or the most innovative parts of each craft. And a new breed of poets is kind of emerging from that, who is able to sort of harness the energy of each of those things. And with that, it brings new audiences. So, for example, with Outspoken, we did a gig last week and sold in excess of 750 tickets.
Wow.
Which is unthinkable a decade ago, certainly for someone, of our level, for people of our level. But I see it playing out kind of across the whole scene. But there is a caution, which is, whilst there was sort of a Zoom revolution and everybody suddenly started doing poems to each other online, I've noticed quite a few clubs shut down within that period in terms of the live arena. I don't know if you've seen the same thing, Michael, but I mean, obviously that allows space for new growth, but I don't think we can be lazy. Poetry is a verb, it's a doing word.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if this thing about now, I mean, that's one of the most interesting words in it as well, alongside where poetry is. It's the compass of it all. We did a festival in 2017, so like 5 years ago, for Hull City of Culture, called Where Are We Now? But for me, the most interesting part of that was now, and it was a festival of subcultures and countercultures, but poetry was at the heart of it. We had Lennon Kwesi Johnson, Sabrina Mahfouz, Holly McNish, Rodney P, different people, Akala, all involved in it. But by the time we agreed to do that festival, it was pre-Trump initially getting elected into America. It was pre-Brexit happening in the UK. So the nowness that we were reflecting as we started to curate this festival 6 months later was entirely turned on its head. The nowness is the fast-moving part of it. Poetry is there alongside it in the sort of bumper car of the now, and it's altering and shape-shifting, and it's amazing how quickly poetry evolves to go on with what's around it. But we're, as a group of artists, I feel like poets are some of the most fast reacting in the world, because they're constantly throwing their own premonitions in there, and everybody's being as prophetic as they can from the outset in a way which is conducive to each other, in a way that's, you know, supporting each other. There is this real sort of community collective, especially in Scotland, with a small group of artists. So when there's a new now or a new noi, we're all as keen to catch up as possible. But I think it is constantly evolving, and a lot of it's, all we can do is look at where we are now. You know, British writers are still traveling the globe and being involved in really important conversations. I've just came back from Estonia, bordered in Russia, and taken part in this like really brilliant international literature festival. And I know, Joelle, you're actually coming to us from Norway at the moment. And last time I think we were in the same room together was at a poetry festival in Queensland in Australia. So we've both spent years building these scenes, these understandings, contributing to them and nurturing them, and like learning from others around us in London and Edinburgh and these different places. But we've became part of this international network, and it's a pleasure, and there's a responsibility that comes with it as well. And we're in these great positions where we get to constantly learn for international advocates of what poetry now is. And it's so fast evolving, it's hard to ever agree on a definition without feeling like you're becoming stagnant in an environment which shouldn't be.
That's a really good point, really good point to make. And I think because maybe something to do with the form itself being a short form. It's not just about it. At the heart of poetry, like you said, is prophecy and envisioning and predicting what's happening. But the form itself is immediate, particularly spoken word. So you can literally write something now and I could perform it tonight or read it. I'm not saying it'd be any good, but I can respond to what's happening in the immediate. Whereas if like we both write long form as well, we both write prose, it'll probably be 2 years before my prediction comes out, by which time it's all over. It's over. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because I think the other thing, at least my perception of this, is that there's been a further opening up of this space to different voices, that other people are coming in and saying, I've got a right to claim a part of this. I've got a right to the stage or the page or whatever. You know, do you feel that that's actually happening? I mean, undoubtedly enriching, but do you think it's actually happening and that there are fewer barriers to individuals who might previously have thought that there was no way into this for them?
I think there's definitely a more conscientious approach to publishing. We were talking about some of the American poets there. To me, Ocean Vuong and Ada Limon are some of the like leading voices in American poetry, and you've got Joe Harjo as the national poet of America at the moment. And 10, 20 years back in America, it was Billy Collins and people like this. And I love Billy Collins, but at the same time of it, there is this whole new international diaspora of poets that are conquering the world in their own way, but it's through emotional vulnerabilities, it's through inclusivity, it's through protection of languages. That's a big thing in Scotland. Obviously, we've got English, we've got Scots, we've got Gaelic, but alongside that, it's sort of revolutionary to like fight for your own languages. Josie Giles has just released Deep Wheel Orcadia, the first full-length Orcadian poetry novel in like 50 years, and there's some great writers like Roseanne Watt doing a lot with the Shetlandic dialect. So there is a real sort of flag of rebellion and sometimes like protecting our languages alongside that, and that is something that's quite current yet ancient at the same time.
Yeah, really good points. I think back to like, how did I get into poetry? Because I don't know what your background is, Michael, but I'm from the end. So I'm from like a space where there wasn't any access to the arts at all. It wasn't, even today, if somebody says to me, do you want to go out? I don't think, oh, theatre, I'll go to see poetry. I think pub. That's the only thing I think every time, even though I spend my life on stage. So I think like, when you see yourself, when a book is a mirror, then you can see yourself writing it. And if a stage is a mirror, you can see yourself on it. So I feel actually around about 2013, it's not even now, Peter, but I saw the rise in spoken word in particular, of the thing we call spoken word, which is in fact just poetry, with artists like Holly McNish and Kay Tempest, around about 2013, 14, when they started to kind of get much wider audiences, which meant that wider audiences started to consider poetry as a medium they might want to, first of all, witness, either
Yeah.
as readers or audience, and second of all, to participate in, and that widening of audience and readership is absolutely vital to feed the diversity of art. It's the art itself. Um, I'm a passionate advocate, obviously, of the live poetry experience because it goes beyond then what we understand poetry to be. And I'm not just talking about individual poems or poets, but the actual experience of being in a theatre or a venue, the semantics of how you get there. And I think the best or the most long-lasting and poetry nights and the most innovative and interesting are ones that consider the poem beginning before the audience has left their house. Like, what are the parameters? What are the metrics of getting here? Who can get here? Who doesn't feel they can get here? Why don't they think they belong in this space? How does it affect, say, our audience who are used to the 100 Club on Oxford Street, which is a long way away from the South Bank Centre in terms of smell? But it's got that amazing legendary vibe. Are the same people got to feel comfortable walking into the pristine Purcell rooms? What does that do to their understanding?
I think that's a great point. There's such a nervosity that comes with newbies coming to poetry nights, and that's such a responsibility to break that down. I remember the first two times I went to a poetry night, where I was living in London at the time, and I went to the Poetry Cafe, wanted to read out a poem, but shit myself and left. Like I felt that was more on me than on them. But it's a big thing. If you're along to read a poem or you're exposing yourself vulnerably, there's so many factors at play. And I think you have to consider that. Like, people don't know how to act at poetry nights either when they come along. Like, is it okay to whoop and cheer? I've had people come up to me and apologize afterwards saying, "Oh, I'm really sorry. Some of that laughter just burst out. I was trying to suppress it the whole time." I was like, "Oh, laugh away. It's gold dust. I'm looking for that laughter." Like there's all of this like humor in the sadness of it. And it's a very big thing to do for the first time, especially if you're coming along on your own to a lot of these nights, which a lot of people are if they don't come from arts backgrounds and they've not had poetry punctuate in their lives and they don't know any writers or artists. Like, they can't automatically find a chum to go along with them, so they're going on their own. They're taking a lot of big risks. So it's always been a thing of ours as well about this live environment. Like, make it rival the nightclub, make it rival the Saturday night rock concert. Like, I want people to come away from this thinking, wow, that was a blast. It is like you're saying, are you going out? We want this to be the equivalent of, oh fuck, I'm going out to a poetry night tonight. Who knows what's going to happen? They're bringing all these elements in. It is a big social endeavor. It can be rambunctious, but it's sort of beautiful and nurturing at the same time. And yeah, the more welcoming these places can be, the better, because it has traditionally been very, very intimidating.
And the root, of all this, I always call spoken word or live poetry the last free art. Because you can't go to the opera and the local stands up beforehand and gives a little aria. You don't go to contemporary dance, the ballet, and Mrs. Hamilton down the road gives it a little bit of this. But it's a tradition with most live nights that there is an open mic before it happens. So most of us have performed wherever you are in the world. There's maybe up to 10 open micers before you get to the feature, because that's how you learn your trade. It's how you bring audiences in. And it's how you create community.
I mean, it's really interesting on another level as well. I do a lot of work in terms of like writing development, working with writers at quite an early stage in their process, and the conundrum always used to be with poetry: how do I make this work? How do I get published? How do people make a living at poetry? Where are we now with that? If you were a writer really drawn into all these amazing events and this great stuff online and all the rest of it, how does someone think about progress in these kind of ways now? I mean, I'm making assumptions that with people like Holly and Kate and so on, the old distinctions between the traditional and the new, and you know, they I know they're sort of published by Picador. I think it is a great traditional publishing house, but they do Instagram and they do all these other things. What's the way into this? What's the route map, if there is one, for poets looking at all of this and thinking, I want to be a part of this. This is for me.
For me, you know, like the best way to write is to write, yeah? And the best way to become involved in the scene, I think, is like literally through the open mic scene. So you start to create connections, but the most important thing you're doing is you're participating in the University of Poetry. So you're learning from people, and you learn as much from poets you don't like as those that you revere, you know, because it's about how we use language and how we can push language, and what that means, what ideas we can pass to each other. That's not going to pay you rent, but you have to begin somewhere. I don't know about anybody else. When I did my apprenticeship of poverty, which was, you know, a good sort of 15 years. But the best way, open mics, and then maybe set up your own night and invite people who you can see have got books coming out, so you don't really have to pay them very much, you might hope. And then your name becomes associated with their name, or that person, that poet you admire, maybe admires you always do like a warm-up poem if you set up a night, a couple of them. One of the reasons you do that is to practice yourself, but also so the more established artists can listen to you, and they might think about you later on, 6 months down the line, and think, oh, I wonder what Joelle's doing, and see if she'll do this for 25 quid, you know. And then the major thing, the bread and butter, is leading workshops. And that gives you such power. It's a very empowering thing, not just for yourself in terms of being able to pay your way, but again, back to that word, connection with the local community and community building and idea building. And I saw for myself the kids I was working with grow up from kind of, what's the word, marginalised, let's say, 13-year-olds to coming to the gigs 10 years later, because they associated poetry with me, that dickhead in the corner of the room, jumping up and down, you know, trying to make it. It's a myth that you can't create a career out of poetry. My whole house is built, every brick is a poem I wrote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Michael, just before you come in on that, can I just say, of course, that your performance productions and so on, Reekie, is now, I think it's 10 years old this year.
It's older now. It's now sort of 12 years old.
It's 12 years old now.
Lost years to COVID. We sort of lost our 10th birthday parties.
Yeah. That now, the nuts and bolts of that, I mean, where you are now with this, related to this thing has started out, I'm sure you didn't think you'd be, I mean, you might have wanted to be, but you didn't think you'd be where you are now with that when these things started in Edinburgh. What are the kind of nuts and bolts of that? I mean, it's an incredibly strong, if I can even use the word, brand, you know, that when you see this, you know what it's going to be. It's very exciting. It brings lots of things together for the first time. All sorts of things kind of explode off of that information on the poster, doesn't it? How did you put that together in the context of this same question as well?
Yeah, well, I think Joelle touched on it there as well. If it's not there, build it. Like, we built Reekie out of a sort of suffocation of the stuffiness or the stillness of a lot of the other poetry nights, but basically being intimidated to go to some of them. Also, I wanted to see some of, like, you know, the best published page poets alongside the best spoken word poets, because to me, they were producing the same degree of lustrousness. There shouldn't have been this big divide. I wanted to have Holly McNish and Douglas Dunn or Don Patterson on the same stage, because they're both masters of their craft and they rightly should be on the same stage together. But it was not putting too much pressure on it at the start. It wasn't like, right, this is my job now. I had to let it evolve organically. It couldn't have been too much of a push. It took about, for the first 5 years, it was a love endeavor. It was a hobby. But one we spilled our hearts into and crafted, and it was a monthly night. And then it started growing, and it grew really big, really fast. People wanted us to curate events on their behalf. We kept outgrowing venues. At first, it was really just word of mouth advertising, but it was the generational thing as well. I joined forces with Kevin Williamson. He'd run Rebel Inc., published people like Laura Hurd and Irvin Welsh and Alan Warner, and writers that were like pretty established now and were drawn back from public affairs. And I was surrounded by writers that were doing their first open mics, producing their first chapbooks, and bands that were doing the same. It was a really hungry, vivacious thing. And as these two audiences and these two generations smashed together, the older performers who'd perhaps maybe been a bit frustrated by the scene at the time were re-enlivened to be around this energy, and the young performers, as you say, were delighted to be performing in front of some of their favorite writers in the hope they might tour with them or collaborate with them. And that stuff really happened. It was this fertile breeding ground.
Yeah.
And then over the 10 years, it then becomes a business and an enterprise. And we've got staff members that have came on board now. But we maintain those sort of chaotic monthly core shows in old galleries or like backroom pub spaces at the same time as doing the big contracts for, Hull City of Culture or BBC Arts or all of these. As you do the big scale productions, which are a bit more rigid in your curatorial capacities, and often, you've got to sell 1,000 tickets. You can't put on all the young new voices. From that perspective, it's so vital for us to still have that little experimental mixing pot. We 75-person, 100-seater theatre where we know people will come along, as you say, for the brand. They've enjoyed the shows, they've enjoyed the big names, but they want to see what we're doing on a grassroots level as well, because it felt disingenuous to keep to those bigger contracts without having this big mixing pot. But it was 5 years before I started working for Reekie sort of foolish time, but then was still doing a lot of workshops on the side of that. And it was like 8 years before it was like, could be a full-time job for a couple of different people. And it couldn't have been rushed. It couldn't have been like, I'm giving up this job and I'm doing the spoken word now. It had to happen organically because it's such a personal space to bring people into, and you have to be very careful with how you invite people into it and make sure you're sort of continuing that ferv and that verve and not sort of blow the load too quickly with it all. So yeah, it was a slow burner, but and we just took each hurdle as we came, and just having brilliant people around us, even though it was a core team, it became a collective, and everybody wanted to come back with these new ideas, and having that collective of people around you that feel like you're their family, that you're their go-to for, that you're mixing pot. If you've got the right people, they're going to go off and win huge literary prizes, the TS Eliot Prizes, Ted Hughes Awards, all of these like really nice, these incredible anointments in literary society. You've been alongside them and nurtured them, so there's a loyalty there to what you've built and what you've invested in them, that you give yourself if you ever get into these positions. So I think that collective fervor and collective ownership is so crucial.
And it's collectivity is the antidote to cultural fascism, completely. Like with us in Outspoken, very similar story to Reekie, which is I didn't get involved until it'd been going for about 4 years. I'd performed there, but there were a couple of other brilliant hosts before I joined, and it's just a sense of mates trying to make something work, because we couldn't see it anywhere in London, the kind of thing that we wanted to be involved in, and allowing it to organically develop, and really, really slowly it becoming something that was Arts Council funded, something where, and we still actually, and we don't get paid, not for the work we do. So, we literally are on the Slack every day. The Slack is an app where we organise everything via that. And I think I'll tell you how much I get paid: £150 a month. That's including for the hosting. So it's very much a huge labour of love. But I feel like it's a privilege as well, because you're doing the thing you love, and you're meeting people who are so much better than you. And it's, that raises the bar. That raises the bar of our expectations, which is vital. In any art form, like you say, it shouldn't be stagnant.
Yeah, no, as you say, it's such a privilege. You find yourself in these curatorial positions, and you can just start booking your favorite poets that have got books around, and you design.
Yeah,
It's almost starts selfishly by designing the exact show that you want to see. All of a sudden, it's
yeah,
sprawled in front of you. Other writers want to share. You get to share the bill with them. People feel that enthusiasm and that energy. People have sacrificed to be in that room tonight, and it's such a powerful thing to find your place and to know it keeps coming back.
I think it is so interesting that, because I think, say, Michael, your thing I've been at a few times over recent years, apart from the pandemic, and it's amazing how it acts as a kind of lightning rod for a sense of place as well. I can't really think about Edinburgh without thinking, and the scene in Edinburgh, the creative scene, without thinking about those nights. It becomes a kind of defining thing also. And I think the same's true of Outspoken as well, that it's actually like a kind of something that the place owns and which gives back to place in such a hugely positive way. I know those things didn't start at the 100 Club. That's a great big venue as well. It starts somewhere less than that. Do you think that moving to somewhere like the Purcell Room, which of course built its reputation on being quite a different place than it has been in recent decades, of course, has that changed it as well, though? Do you...
the major change, right, is it's a very selfish one. The dressing room is amazing. Like the first time we went in, so Outspoken is Anthony Axelguru, Karim Kamar, Sam Junior Bromfield, Tom McAndrew, and me. And we walked into this room, and there was a fridge full of alcohol. I absolutely lost it, and it's every month that happens, and it's like these fairies arrive. So I'm joking, but just in terms of the care of the artists, what you're able to provide, the space you're able to provide, it has not affected our programming at all. It's remained the same. 3 poets, 2 bands, per show. 15 minutes pretty much for everybody.
Yeah. Sometimes I'm amazed at the spaces they let us into. We did a show for the National Galleries up here, and it's like we were commissioning responses to the Titian's paintings. And we got into the space, and it's like, but the paintings are just there, and they're like, oh yeah, we're going to use them as a backdrop for their show. And it's like, that's a multi-million-pound backdrop there. Normally we've got a scrappy old screen, and we're projecting someone
possibly the most expensive backdrop ever made.
Yeah. Right. So you're not taking them out. We just get to sort of use them as a backdrop. So there's definitely a
huge fear, like I said earlier, was that we would lose the audience, that a different audience will come. And sure enough, there are a typical South Bank audience who will block book tickets for loads of shows and then not show up. But we were very heartened to see it's our same crew turning up. But it's, and in terms from the South Bank's perspective, it means we're bringing in new audiences, a very different kind of audience, from different sort of backgrounds, etc. And it's been really a really vibrant and really a brilliant experience working with them. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, we started in the back room of a pub. Every poetry night starts somewhere like that. We've done open mic nights in the past as well. You've got to be inventive and exploratory and have fun, because actually it's exhausting. It's really exhausting to kind of put on gigs and chase people.
It does feel so positive, I think, for place. Even someone like, the Purcell Room, Queen Elizabeth Hall, these sort of places that used to be just full of classical music and the people who like that. I was last there in November, where the poet and musician Moormother was performing, in the foyer. It's a big space. And I just remember feeling, and they were queuing over the Hungerford Bridge, which in London goes over the Thames, and it's kind of all down the embankment and all that sort of. And I just couldn't get over the feeling of like, my God, this isn't an event. This is an occupation. This stuff from the streets of Philadelphia, that's some of the most important messaging for me that's in this space, in the spoken word space, was there in this place. And I think that kind of feeling, I think just can't be bettered in a way where people feel that their form of expression, their form of identity and so on is actually in a space like that. To take it away from the old places and put it there, I think is so important. Just
Yeah, I think the scene depends, absolutely depends on events in all kinds of different spaces. You have to have the scruffy backroom pub. You have to have the library, as much as these kind of much bigger spaces with Titian paintings behind you. It's got to do that. It's a verb. It's got to
yeah,
be moving all the time and trying to find different spaces.
It's a
yeah,
thrill, isn't it? Because you move to these places, like when you get invited to do the National Gallery or National Museum or these big festivals, it's because they've seen who your audience are. They've seen you fill in atypical spaces in the back room of pubs and old working men's clubs and town halls that aren't used very often, and they want a piece of that. Your people, your audience, your family and collective become your currency. They want that younger, more working class, more queer, more diverse audience that's coming to these events to engage with these national institutions, and you become the sort of conduit between the two. But as you're saying, if it hadn't started in the pubs and the bars and you were straight with there, people need to feel like they're making their transition with you. The number of spaces we went into and the audience thought, oh, this is fancy, isn't it? You don't get this at poetry normally. And it becomes a thrill. Like they become a part of your transition and your evolution, and everyone's sort of excited to be in these new spaces. And as you say, you feel like you're taking over. It's billed as a takeover, and it is a takeover. You come and you embody the space through your audience, and there's a newness and a freshness to the space and to the institution, but they then want to keep hold of it. It's such a beautiful currency and transition.
It becomes a movement, doesn't it? It's beyond like I'm going to now see one of my favorite poets. It's and often we've found that audiences are coming not knowing who the poets are necessarily. So it's like the brand itself is what they're invested in. They know they're trusting us as curators that whatever is on is going to be something really interesting or exciting or unexpected. And in any case, it'll all be over in 15 minutes if they don't like it. So it's going to be like that. Wait for the next thing.
Just before coming to some poetry to close. Sorry, Michael, go on.
That's something what Joelle was saying I meant to touch on as well. We're definitely of a similar mindset and kinship there. We've always kept set short to like 15 minutes, 20 minutes, you're sort of pushing it. It doesn't matter who you are, like, Irvin Welsh, Jackie Kay, Young Fathers, you should be able to do something for us in that period of time, and audiences love that, and people take a chance on it because it's like, oh, that was a bit left field for me, but the next thing's going to bring it on board with me. And that's this thing of this new generation of literary nights. They realize that it's not two readers reading for 45 minutes each. They're just swallowing up the room. It's loads of different voice boxes. It's loads of different conversations. There's just as many sensibilities spilling onto stage as there is in the room, and keeping those slots short is such a vital part of that. But like 15 minutes is at the same time when you go to look at your own work, you can have such a big conversation with an audience in that period of time.
Yeah. Well, just before coming to a close and some more poetry, which I'm kind of really looking forward to, can I just ask you both about your route into the, international scene? That doesn't happen overnight. Happens. How did that happen for you both? And how does that, how do you feel your poetry is different, or as it were the same when you read elsewhere? Said you're in Norway as we speak, Joelle. But how does your voice feel in these other places?
I mean, personally speaking, touch wood, I've had the most amazing experience. Like, I've loved it because, like we said, the UK's only got a certain number of venues, and I perform a lot. People get tired of you a lot, and also if you're performing a lot, you're not writing as much. That's one thing for sure. If you're on the road, you're not creating new work, so it's essential that you take your work further out as far as it can go. And the interesting thing, like, I've been asked to Brazil 3 times, and they do not speak English, and I've taken part in the Brazilian, not the Brazilian international slams in Brazil, but I've also kind of graduated from that to doing my own little shows there, and they project. In some of them, they project translations of your writing behind you.
Okay.
It's really interesting because what they're responding to is energy, not words. You know, and maybe they'll read the words later, but at the time, or sometimes you get live translations. I've had so far. What have I done here? I did the opening gala, which was amazing because it was an unexpected kind of event. It was very, very posh and very big. And they put me in a lapel mic, and I had to sit on stage with I think 9 other performers, and then we got up one by one and did a 10-minute piece, you know, and it was amazing. And last night was the queer thing, so the queer gala. So I just basically, you find that people may not have the same experiences of poetry. Estonia, for example, where Michael and I have both been, had, when I went over, a much more traditional notion of poetry. And the slam scene was very nascent. It was very, very new to them, this idea that you could put your paper down. Because what happens is people think spoken word is not poetry, and so often they go from writing the most exquisite poem, and they go, oh, I'm going to try spoken word, and then they just stop using poetry and just do statements. You know, it's very frustrating to me when people do that and don't try to kind of combine both things.
Yeah.
But I find particularly the slam community and spoken word community, live poetry community, is very strong international links. People know each other. A man I just met literally when I was having lunch came up to me and said, "You don't know me, but I know you, and you're the reason. I'm the reason you're here, because I'm big in the Nordic slam scene." And sorry, I have no idea who you are, but he's the person who takes it upon himself to know what everybody's doing, you know, across Europe, and then make recommendations, you know, in his remit, and we all do that for each other.
Yeah.
But for me, it's become the absolute. And the way into it for me was via British Council, first of all, going to different African countries back in the day and advising them on how to set up slams. This is like in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And then they lost interest in me for about 10 years. But in the meantime, the slam scene had got so big, so people would invite me to other countries to do that. And then I just did it myself. I set up my own tours.
Right. Wow. Yeah. What about you, Michael? What's it been like for you?
Yeah, I mean, we've benefited massively from being in Edinburgh, from Edinburgh being the UNESCO's world's first ever city of literature, sort of being the parent city on that big network. And we've benefited from the fact that in August, literary directors from all the festivals all over the world come to Edinburgh at that point in time. Of course, as one of the longest running and the biggest Edinburgh poetry night, we get danced out in front of them. They would bring a lot of festival directors to Reekie events. And because there was all varieties of poets on there alongside poetry, experimental music and filmmaking, they thought there's a dialogue there that we can bring over, and we could sort of design this custom package with them, and there was less of a risk in bringing over free writers that might squabble with each other, because it felt like a complete show. There was a whole bill of poets that were going to come up and perform together as part of a production, so they could win new audiences in that perspective. And we've been really lucky. We've taken Reekies to like New York, Barcelona, New Zealand, Malawi, all these different countries, and we've brought the full package to them. It's a custom delivered show. Remember at Cosmopolis Festival in Barcelona, it was me and Kevin and Jackie Kay and then Vaselines and a few other people, and we were wedged in between Bernard Herzog doing a film showcase and PJ Harvey afterwards, and I thought, right, this is a glorious cocktail sandwich in here. Got to be in the middle of it. Sort of, I found my sacred home. But yeah, like the last event we just back from Estonia yesterday, and the last event we just did there was the Poetry Mass in one of Estonia's oldest churches on a Sunday. And I think there was 14 languages spoken. There was Estonian, people from Belarus, Norway, all over. And there was only a small pocket of people in the room that could understand each of the languages that weren't necessarily Estonian or English. But there was so much performance panache in the room, that people were appreciating, that fellow writers and poets and performers were appreciating the craft of what they did. They could hear the intonation, they could see the vast amount of text that had been memorized, you could feel the emotion. You might be completely off on what the sentiment of the piece is, but that doesn't really matter. You can still take from it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, amazing. So I'd like to bring to a close, but I said we'd have a little bit more poetry, another two each. And before going into that, just say thank you so much for this session today. It's been really, really interesting, and really valuable as well. I think for the kind of writers and people wanting to find their way into this. So where should I go first? Joelle, Michael started last time, so.
Okay. So this one, I'll start with one of mine, and this is again from XpoNorth. It's another one of the Butches, and this is the opening poem for Valentine. All these Butches, by the way, all these characters within the narrative of the book are real people who died, changed their names, but it's all about sort of my friends. So Valentine is a leather stud, which in straight language just means a black butch, and this is it. Born, right body, wrong day. Valentine flicks her lighter in the corner of the club, and white women flutter. Tonight, she has dressed as the inside of a mouth, a hand-sewn suit excised from a cured night sky black. Leather has its own skincare routine. It listens to its mother. I've heard it said, some girls give birth to themselves from the backs of motorbikes. Invent the wind. Let the road uncurl from between their legs. The Lemniscate motorway, something British and unbidden. I know why we're drawn to the corners. It's where the road cannot reach us. Every part of a woman is a weapon if you know how to hold her, Valentine says. The corner flicks a morse, and in the dark, white hearts beat like moths against a headlight. And this is a British poet, British Somalian poet called Momtaza Mary, who is a former London laureate and doesn't have a full collection out. And it's my favourite praise poem. Praise poems kind of originate in West Africa, ostensibly Nigeria, a way of elevating the ordinary, and Momtaza Mary is an absolute G. It's called Glory Be to the Gang Gang Gang. In praise of all that is honest, call upon the acrylic tips and make a minaret out of a middle finger, gold dipped and counting. In the name of filet-o fish, pink lemonade, the sweat on an upper lip, the backing swell and ache of Abdul Basit Abdul Samad on cassette tape, a clean jump shot, the fluff on Ashanti's sideburns, the rice left in the pot, the calling cards and long waits, the seasonal bursts of bacala bought dates, every time they leave and come back alive. Birthmarks shaped like border disputes, black sand, Shah Rukh's dimples like bullets taking our aunts back to those summer nights, these blessings on blessings on blessings. Give me the rub of calves, rappers sampling jazz, the char of frankincense, and everything else that makes sense in a world that don't. That's Momtaza.
Wow, thank you, Michael.
That was incredible. It's so great to read with you, even in a virtual environment. I mean, I don't think I've came across anybody in the south of England and even the entire English poetry scene that doesn't have like brilliant things to say about just what a force of rejuvenation, inspiration, drive you've been in the spoken word scene countrywide. And I think the whole country, all our countries, were celebrating when you won the TS Eliot Prize. It was just
absolutely
incredible fate and tribute to what you've achieved.
Thank you.
So in a twist on that, I'm going to read a poem about a period of my boyhood where I was convinced that I was more feline than human child. That is more cat than boy. It spent a good period of my childhood convinced that I was in fact the cat prince and not young Michael Pedersen. I would try and transform into a cat by taking off all my clothes, purring and pouncing around. It made an interesting environment at play dates. In fact, my mum got some reports back from fellow mothers that caused her some concern. Some of those play dates were not replicated. There was no second invite. I got a poem out of it 25 years later. It's called The Cat Prince. Spoiler, I am the Cat Prince. I am the Cat Prince, I declare, already on all fours, already balls naked in the house of Hasty, where there's Adam Hasty, Daniel, and me, the Cat Prince. We're boyhood budburs, 12 years of silliness. Adam laughs, frantic gasps, guffaws, then pegs it to his bedroom, anticipating the chase. Daniel, wavering between cat and laddie, compañero and fugitive, succumbs to the Gnostic glamour, strips naked for a full feline transformation. Down to our little furs, little bloods, ready to breach past the chide of absent classmates who might well hear of this and smite us with shame. We are cuddle kings, hankering for Adam's adulation. Oh, Moggy, Moxie, we embrace the cat life, vow inurement to its side effects. Carpet burns, windlash pimpling, the sacrifice of language in each falsetto yowl. As hunters, we're tasked by the Creator, our gaze a crosshair, our pounce a ripple of bravura. Who else so guilefully stalks sunbeams? We do well here. It's those damn cats again, the neighbours would learn to yawp as I raced by with a robin redbreast between my jaws and Daniel finished shitting in their rhubarb patch. It's convenient not to think of the killer in us, holding back our purr, assassins still. As we coil our new cat bodies to a spring, Adam clambers fear to top the bed. What happens next is louder than we hoped for. Adam's mum, startled by the cacophony, arrives, then screams, curtailing the play date. And later that night, she calls my mum concerned. Though my mum never mentions this, I can only assume she was wise to it. The mythos, the hieroglyphs, fathomed we'd soon meet the type of trouble that can really shake boys down. Long days where the teeth tear it out of us and the claws don't stop coming. But not yet, I hear her whisper, not without this moment's orchestra of feeling. As a boy, I was whiskerless, weighed down by the nest of knots squat in my belly. As a cat, I was so much more. Of course, as mother to the cat prince, she knew all this. I'm going to finish with a poem by a New Zealand poet called Hera Lindsay Bird, whose eponymously titled collection is called Hera Lindsay Bird. I like the grit it takes to call a collection after yourself. She's the master of the simile for me. Me and actually after we met Joelle in Queensland, we went off to read at Christchurch Literary Festival in New Zealand, and me and Holly and Omar Musa and a big group of writers ended up doing a show together with Hera, and she read this one which just sort of knocked me for six. It's called Ways of Making Love. Like a metal detector, detecting another metal detector. Like two lonely scholars in the dark clefts of the Cyrillic alphabet. Like an ancient star, slowly getting sucked into a black hole. So hard we break sports, leaving the conveners of the Olympics with a generous redundancy package. You're a denim tree, and I'm the world's fastest autumn. I am the Atlantic fortress, and you are General Sherman, taking me from behind. You stride into council chambers, waving a petition to orgasm. A lip of cloud brushes the roof of the barn. The pale trees curve around the eye and back into the brain. It's like watching porn through a kaleidoscope, or a slow wind in a kite factory. Like dogs trying to do it people style, but failing due to the inflexibility of their anatomical structures. A cloud of bats floats slowly into your brain rafters. You roll down my stockings like the sun peeling ocean from a Soviet globe. I want you in a 17th century field, tilling the earth like flesh tractors, in the red shade of a mammoth in the Natural History Museum, in the airlock of a space station, my heart shaking like an epileptic star, between the plastic sheets of a lobotomy table, because writing poetry about fucking, when you could be fucking, is the last refuge of the stupid. It's like getting 3 wishes and wishing for less wishes. It's like designing a flag the exact same color of the sky. It's like crying over spilled milk before it's out the cow. It's like breaking into a field at dawn and euthanizing the cow so you can get your crying over and done with and immediately begin adjusting to your new lactose-free existence. But love isn't really like killing cattle, no matter what poetry wants us to believe. The day is a vault, the sun is cracked open, money flying everywhere like really expensive leaves. And here I am, begging you to come back as if you were already gone.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much, Michael Pedersen, Joelle Taylor.
Thank you very much.